Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Last video I talked about automatic success, and so I figured in this video I would talk about the skill system in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. What did I think of it when I read it? What has been my experience with it playing and running the game? What are my thoughts on it? Because after all, this is a series about what my thoughts on 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons as I learn and experience the game, right? So let's talk about this. Early versions of Dungeons and Dragons really had no skill system to speak of whatsoever. It was a class-based game, not a skill-based game. And the only skills there really were in the game were the skills that were associated with the thief class. So when the thief showed up as the fourth core class in the game, the thief came with thief skills. Any other skill sets associated with a character or with a class were kind of implied and informal in their approach, and really depended on your group, your culture of play. And some of us might decide that like a fighter is good at these things and a wizard is good at those things, and it just sort of made sense for them to be a little bit more skilled, but it wasn't necessarily represented mechanically. And depending upon your culture of play, once again, very often people would decide that their, fighter Jack or their thief, Joe, or, Sam the wizard was good at something else, and maybe from their background or their backstory or, whatever. And even, there were things like Tim Kask's famous knack for it, where the first time you roll to do something on a d6, if you succeed, well, your character's actually really good at this, and so they might, succeed on a greater than, 1 in 6 chance. Once again, informal, depend upon the group, depending on the culture of play. The middle editions of Dungeons and Dragons, it became a lot more formalized, and at some point the game suffered from a bit of skills bloat. There were a lot of skills, and also the points that you allocated to them, it could become complicated, and there was, big modifiers, and it became a bit of a math game. So 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons has tried to kind of, put that genie back in the bottle a little bit and make it a little bit easier and a little less complicated. And I think they've done a fairly good job at accomplishing that part of their goal. Now, I've had a lot of fun playing in other games which are skill-based, things like the games powered by Ubiquity or Mithras or what have you. And it can be really cool because you can take a character concept, an idea, and actually make them pretty good at 1 or 2 things or 3 things, things that they're known for, and you can represent your character in that manner. So I actually really like that sort of thing. But, how does 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons handle that? How does it feel? How does it actually work? Well, the skills are affected by an ability score. So you have your 6 ability scores. You have your ability score modifiers, which at first level tend to range from -1 to +3. So if a skill is associated with an ability score, it picks up that modifier. And then if you've chosen to have proficiency in one of those skills, then you get to add your proficiency bonus to it. And at first level, your proficiency bonus is +2. So at the end of the day, the skills that a first level character will have will range in modifiers to their d20 roll from pretty much from -1 to about +5. And sometimes +7 if you're a rogue and you've decided to really max yourself out in a particular ability score and use double proficiency. So what the heck am I talking about? So anyhow, there's 18 skills named in the game, so not too many, and they have different ability scores they're associated with. There's 1 associated with strength, and that is, not surprisingly, athletics. There's 3 associated with dexterity, that's acrobatics, sleight of hand, and stealth. There's nothing associated with constitution, just hit points, and not dying of poison and all that kind of stuff. Not a skill, just an ability. Intelligence has 5 associated with it. That's arcana, history, investigation, nature, and religion. Wisdom also has 5 skills associated with it. It's animal handling, insight, medicine, perception, and survival. And charisma has 4 skills associated with it. That is, or they are, deception, intimidation, performance, and persuasion. So nothing here is real rocket science. Nothing here is really surprising. But those are the 18 skills that you show up, the game shows up with. Now, characters don't necessarily improve in those skills over time. There's no more skill points to put in those skills. The only way you're going to improve in the skills, from first level, is if your ability score is raised. And at certain points, certain levels in the game, like 4th level, I believe, you get to add 2 more points to your ability scores, however you'd like. And if your ability score raises to a point where the modifier changes, then your skill changes as well. And there's certain points in the game where your proficiency bonus goes up. I forget if it finally ends up at it might end up at +6, but there's not a huge span. So your skills improve over time, but it takes several levels for them to actually raise by any significant amount. So pretty much what you start out with tends to be what your character looks like for a good amount of time before they finally start to get a little bit better. They never get they never have this gigantic meteoric rise. Now, depends on your class though. The classes will start out with 4 to 6 skills. Depends on the class. Some races will actually give you a bonus or give you an extra skill that you're proficient in, like elves are proficient in perception. But 9 of the classes actually get to choose 2 skills based on their class, and then 2 other skills from their background. We'll get to backgrounds in a second. 2 of the classes start out with 5, so they get to choose 3 based on their class and 2 more from their background. Those 2 are the Bard and the Ranger. And the Bard actually at 2nd level becomes a jack of all trades. So he or she can apply half their proficiency bonus to all the skills they don't have proficiency in. So they're a little bit better than everybody else. Not too much, but like starting out with like a +1 compared to everybody else to represent, I guess, that they're a jack of all trades. Hooray. The Rogue, on the other hand, they start out with 6 skills, 4 for being a rogue and then 2 more from their background. And each class has to choose from a list of skills from their class. The background skills, that's different. We'll wait for that. 2 of the skills the Rogue has, 2 of those 6 skills, they get to allocate double proficiency to. So one of the kids in my game, he started out, Bjorn, the Drow Rogue, he started out with a +7 to stealth because he got double his proficiency bonus. So it wasn't 2, it was 4. And, the kid playing Bjorn was smart enough to to max out his dexterity. So pretty smart, pretty good play or tactical play from that young man. So he started with this really, giant bonus to stealth. So one of the things that you'll notice in this, and I'm kind of skipping ahead of where I wanted to go, was that if you want to be incredibly skilled in something, well, you've got to play a rogue. And of course, a rogue has all these other class abilities that they just kind of come with. So there's a certain type of person that ends up being really skilled in stuff. It's kind of weird because other people can't. And this certain kind of person is also, well, they're like a rogue and have all had this other set of abilities, not really skills. Now, what about your backgrounds? You get 2 other skills after the skills that are based on your class when you get to choose from a bigger or smaller list, depending on the class. I forget how many backgrounds there's actually in the book, and each background has 2 skills associated with it that you can have proficiency in. However, the book also tells you that, if a player wants 2 other skills, whatever skills they happen to be, if you can justify a background that contains those 2 skills, then go ahead. And I quickly learned, when starting the game and starting to run the game with these kids, that just pick the other 2 skills you want. We can figure out what background that is, or make that a background. Really, when you're involved in character creation, that whole background thing is 2 extra free skills. And there might be other proficiency in something else or something, some extra equipment. But really, you're choosing those 2 extra skills. So choose wisely. So you're able to kind of start your character out with this proficiency in the skills that you want. Now, once again, that proficiency bonus doesn't go up. It only goes up by very small increments over time. And the only other thing that's going to really raise your ability and skills is going to be raising your ability scores. Now, you can choose a feat, and I forget what it's called, but rather than taking your 2 points to put in ability scores at that 4th level, and I think it might be 8th level, maybe 12th, whatever the heck it is, you can instead choose 3 more skills to be proficient in. This sounds really great, except if you look at the game, you look at how the game works, you're really shooting yourself in the foot if you don't take those extra points and you don't generally put them in your primary abilities, the abilities that you should be really good at, especially if you're a spellcaster. And I'll get to that in a different video. But it becomes very obvious in the game really, really fast that if you want to have an effective character of a particular class, you really need to max out certain ability scores. And the book even kind of tells you, well, here's the starting one that's probably pretty good. Do this, if you want to have a quick start character. They kind of let you know. So obviously if you're something like a sorcerer or a bard or whatnot, you want to have charisma, right? You want to max that particular thing out. There's a second thing that happens, though, and it's very predictable, is, well, guess who's really good at investigation? Wizards, because of intelligence. And maybe they put proficiency in that skill, maybe they don't. They're probably stupid if they don't, because now you can be the really smart guy. But you end up with, who's really good at deception and persuasion? Well, it's sorcerers and bards. Might make a lot of sense for a bard, but for the dragonborn sorcerer, because they have bonus in charisma, so you really should be a dragonborn sorcerer. You got this big 300-pound guy that, I can see him being intimidating, but persuasive, It depends on who the person is that they're talking to. But it can present a little bit of problems. All that aside, and any kind of buy-in aside, it's just, well, you know which classes are going to be good at what stuff. You know who's going to be good at athletics. You know which classes are going to be good at acrobatics and sleight of hand and stealth. So it becomes very, very predictable, and it's not always necessarily based upon what an archetype would be of a particular class, what a wizard might be like, or what you think a cleric might be like, or a fighter, or whatever. It's really based upon what ability scores they need to have, primacy in, where they need to put most of their focus. Then they just end up being good at those things. Sometimes, even if they don't have proficiency in those skills, because they end up with so much of a bonus based on the ability score alone, they just have to be really good at this. The other thing that I noticed happening, and I've noticed this with the kids, with the exception of a couple like spikes here and there, all the characters tend to be pretty much the same. There isn't a heck of a lot of variety, because you can't dump a whole bunch of points or whatever into a particular skill and say, hey, you know what, I don't necessarily want to be spread out really far. I want the fighter that's really good at investigation, or the cleric that's really good at persuasion. Father Tim, the persuasive, these sort of things. Because, because that's the wrong ability score, but B, because, the way proficiency works, it kind of goes out flat everywhere. And so really where you're going to see your big spikes is going to be in your ability scores. And so it gets predictable. The characters end up feeling the same. It ends up in some ways, but a little bit differently, feeling like the characters used to be years ago. And so overall, it tends to be kind of a bland skill system. It's very easy to use. There's not a lot of math involved. It's very easy to kind of plug and play, right? But it's a little bland. The only people that have any kind of exciting spikes end up being rogues. And even then, it can be somewhat predictable because, once again, if you're that sort of character, you're probably going to be focusing your energy in things associated with the ability scores based on that class, and the things that would help you do roguish type things. You're probably not going to dump a whole bunch of proficiency and double proficiency in something like performance. So, it's a little flat feeling. It's not the most satisfying skill system I've ever seen. It works for what it does, but it produces kind of samey results. And this happens in some other areas like attack bonuses and how combat feels, but that's a different story for a different video.